It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 723. That's episode 723 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. Hey, I have another excellent episode lined up for you today. Excited to talk to my guest. Joining me on this show is Doug Winter. Doug is the founder and CEO of Seismic, a San Diego-based company, as many of you know, my hometown. So if you know Seismic, then you're not going to be surprised that Doug and I are going to talk about sales enablement and talk about in terms of what it is, who it helps, and how sales teams are using sales enablement to try to establish a competitive edge. Doug and I talk about how a main thrust of sales enablement should be about helping sellers educate themselves quickly about the buyer and the buyer's needs, and then assemble a content that answers the buyer's questions in the most relevant and expeditious way possible. And the thought being that if you have information about the buyer that your competition doesn't have, well, then you have a huge competitive advantage with that prospect. So we're going to get into this and much, much more today. Now, before I get to Doug, I want to take a quick second to talk to you about my Sales Growth Planner, the Sales House Sales Growth Planner. Now, this is the ultimate planner and tracker for high-performance sellers. The Sales Growth Planner is built to help you identify your big, bold sales goals and then give you a step-by-step framework to enable sales achievement and the learning that needs to happen along with it to help you grow to achieve your goals both in this year and subsequent years. Now, the Sales Growth Planner is designed to enable you to act on your highest priorities and ensure that you are holding yourself accountable for your actions. It's based on a planning format that I've successfully put to use over my career to close hundreds of millions of dollars worth of orders, and the thought and effort that you put into creating your plan using this framework will be repaid with interest at the end of the 12-month period. So it's just one more step in the way that you can become the best version of you. So to get your planner, visit thesaleshouse.com/planner. That is thesaleshouse.com/planner. All right, let's jump into it. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's great to see you. You're in my town, San Diego, which I'm actually heading for in just a little bit. Like you said earlier, you're covering the fact that it's actually raining.
I am. Yeah, don't look out the window. It's raining. It's bad publicity for San Diego.
Yeah, which is disheartening news for me because hopefully it'll be clear by tomorrow because I want to hop on my bike and get out and get a good ride in.
There you go.
So, well, we're excited to have you on the show. We're going to talk about sales enablement, and Seismic certainly among the leaders in the sales enablement field, and sales enablement is, one of the hot buzzwords. But I think it's one of those words that people attach all sorts of meanings to it. And so I'd be interested in what your take is. How do you define sales enablement?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And, I think the truth of the matter is that you're absolutely right. It's a topic of a lot of debate and discussion. And there is, in most cases, when you really want to get definitive about a definition for a word, you go to the dictionary and you open it up and you read through it, and then you laugh about the ones that don't fit. But in this case, actually, enablement's not even a word in the dictionary. So we're doing a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek campaign right now. We call the real problem, real word.
Mm-hmm.
Try to get people to sign up. So we're going to petition the powers that be to have the word added to the dictionary.
The Oxford English Dictionary, right?
That's right. And most of the others. In fact, you go to Microsoft Word and you type it in, you get the little dreaded red
squid beneath the line. Yeah,
that's right. So I don't know what that says, since there's something like 10,000 people now that have sales enablement in their job title out on LinkedIn. So I think the dictionaries need to catch up. But,
yeah.
Enablement, I think it does mean different things to different people, but the way we look at it is it's whatever technologies or processes or training can help make sellers more effective in their jobs, have them spend more time and be able to close more deals more quickly. And, that can take a lot of different forms. And if you look at the technology stack, I think we're all familiar with that MarTech stack slide. It has 7,000 logos on it that are so small you can't really see them.
Well, and sales tech's catching up.
And if you take a step back and you look at that, the biggest block there visually, the biggest block with the most logos in it is sales enablement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason is that it's a space that the definition is still sort of being worked out. And so there's a lot of different tools and small features that are being out presented as enablement. And our take on it and what we're really focused on is really around the content side.
Mm-hmm.
What we observed in the marketplace is that I think it's pretty well documented at this point that sellers show up to your door. They're more educated than they've ever been before. They've self-educated on your website.
You're talking about the buyers here, yeah.
Sorry, buyers.
Right. Yeah.
Buyers show up at your door. They're more educated. They've done research. They've read all the crowdsourced reviews about your product. They've probably seen demos online about your product. They've been able to do a tremendous amount of research before they really put up their hand and say, hey, I'd like to talk to a human being or engage with a human being. And so when that happens and they do finally appear at your door and you're going to have a conversation with them, I think the burden on the sellers has gone up tremendously to be able to be more prepared, more educated about who they're going to be speaking with, who the buyer is and what their needs are going to be. And it's not so fair because you don't necessarily have that much information about the buyer. So you have to very quickly gather the information about the buyer. What industry are they in? What are they looking for? What solution stack might you be replacing or integrating with? What geography are they in? What industry are they in? What role does a person play that you're talking to? You want to gather as much of that information as possible and then try to put the story together that's going to answer the questions in the most relevant way possible that person is going to have. And so we're really focused on helping solve that part of the puzzle, which is how do you get sellers to be able to be quickly up to speed and have the right content assembled to have an intelligent conversation with a prospective buyer.
So, well, let me ask a question though, because this is something that comes up quite frequently is, okay, but how's the demand on the seller really that different than it might have been in the past? I mean, ultimately, I sold for companies in San Diego area, some really large, very complex communication systems. We still had to converge at the same point with the buyer, right? That we had to be able to sell the value, sell the vision, sell the outcomes. Yeah, that part hasn't changed. So what's different today in your mind than what you're seeing for sellers that's changed?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. One is that the expectation around the time and the amount of discovery time that's going to be given to the seller has been, the demands there have been increased significantly. So
meaning less time is available for discovery?
Much less time is available. And so if your competitors are immediately jumping into a conversation that says, I know exactly what you're looking for and I know a lot about you and here's exactly the right case study and exactly the right story and exactly the right value proposition, and it takes you a week or 2 weeks to put that same dialogue together, you're going to be at a big disadvantage. And I think the other thing that's happened is not really so much a change in what a seller is doing, but as an organization, companies are looking to scale. Everyone's getting a tremendous amount of pressure from competition, from the marketplace. You got to go faster. You have to do more with less. And so the old way may very well have been, let's take 2 weeks to prepare for this big meeting. And we'll pull the marketing team in and tell them, hey, this is what the story that we think we need to tell for this customer. And the marketing team will go off and spend a week and prepare a bunch of stuff and send it back to the sellers. And the sellers will go, no, not quite right. Let's try to iterate a little bit more. And now it's more a question of, how do all those things take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of hours. How can I do that in a much more scalable way so that I can scale my team up quickly? I can onboard new people much more quickly without having to give them a year to ramp up, to learn all the, where all the bodies are buried and all the sort of water cooler knowledge that, just comes with time. How can you sort of accelerate that process and do all of these things at a much bigger scale in a much faster way?
Well, one of the areas I always am interested in, because again, as we talked about before, is just there's not a lot of good data on sales and what's happening in sales. I said we get the
Right.
data points from CSO Insights, Forrester, a few other people, but I mean they wouldn't they wouldn't rise to the level of rigor of a clinical study for a drug or anything like that.
Right.
But just taking the data points that are out there, there's we are in this golden, I call it the golden age of sales technology, tools that God, I would have loved to have had when I was sort of carrying a bag in the prime of my sales career. But when you look at those data points, they're not showing that the tools are helping us be better, right? That we see falling quota attainment rates, falling win rates, falling close rates, in various studies. So where's the disconnect? I mean, have we just not learned how to use the tools effectively? And I'm not just talking about sales enablement. I'm talking about sales engagement, and I'm just talking about everything, even CRM systems, even though they've been around for 20 years. So, where do you think we're sort of missing the boat, perhaps, or what do we still have to learn?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, and I think it's probably a combination of things. I mean, you certainly have a tool stack that is still evolving very rapidly. I look at just our own team. We have 100 and some sellers now at Seismic. We're a relatively small company still. But our own technology stack is changing very quickly. So we bring something in, we try it for 6 months or a year, we like it, we expand, or we see a new, different one that comes along. So many of these, and especially in the enablement area, are relatively young, relatively immature. Maybe they're only solving a fairly small, specific part of the problem. I think that over time the stack is going to consolidate. You're going to see less vendors doing more, and that's going to happen as it has in most technology areas over time. Kind of things that used to be or that you would consider a feature become part of a platform, and the whole stack evolves and consolidates to a couple of different vendors that can supply end to end. So I think some of that's going to happen as things evolve. But I also think that, when you look at things like overall win rates, you got to remember that, you're comparing probably companies against each other. And so it may be that, in general, the win rates haven't improved significantly, or quota attainment hasn't improved significantly. But I think the more interesting data would be those who adopt the technology versus those who don't. And I suspect that would tell a fairly crisp story around people that are adopting the technologies are staying around and staying in business, and those that are lagging behind, are lagging behind and probably failing.
Well, but which brings up an interesting point, though, and I don't want to get too far off the track here, but it sort of comes back as we talk about effectiveness and productivity in sales. Is in general, we sort of look at this sort of predictable revenue model that has become sort of the Bible for so many people in at least in the SaaS space, has sort of created this environment where it's based, even companies are scaling quickly with it. And again, I'd contend they would scale quickly regardless of whether they're using this model or not. But it seems to be institutionalizing sort of bad performance in many respects, right? It's because we see so many SaaS companies, and I was just keynoting an event a couple weeks ago in North Carolina where I had talked to lots of sales leaders after the fact, and they're carrying these pipeline coverage ratios. Everybody's obsessed with we get 5x coverage, which if you have 5x coverage, your win rate's gonna be the reciprocal of that, right? It's just by definition. Yeah. Well, you can't sustain a 20% win rate. I mean, your sellers are spending 80% of the time. It's like to say, when in that environment, the only thing you're training your sellers to do is lose, right? If the thing they're doing most predominantly is losing, then you're training your sellers to lose. So, but that's oftentimes being driven by the tools, because the tools are saying, look, we've made it really easy to put a ton of crap on the top of the funnel through our sales engagement platforms and so on. And I've had conversations with CROs of sizable SaaS companies that, their growth plan is, let's just focus on putting more stuff in the top of the funnel, I'll hire more SDRs, and it's okay, we're only closing 1 out of 5, because as long as I put enough stuff in the top of the funnel. Right. But I'm like, whoa, dude. I mean, it's like, have you ever thought about not doing that and working on increasing your win rate, and it's just not on the horizon for many of these sales leaders. So how do we change that?
Yeah, that's a great observation. It's maybe a perpetual challenge between leadership, executive leadership, the CEO, and the head of sales. Well, what are the quotas going to be? What's the target for the quarter? And well, we don't have enough coverage for that. And I said, well, we don't have enough ramped reps. Well, that's easy then. Just increase the quota per rep, and now we have enough coverage to overlap to solve for it. And they don't like that answer, of course, either. So it's a pretty interesting discussion. What we really try to do is focus on every step of the funnel.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the top of the funnel. We absolutely do, and we track that from marketing, and we try as best we can to attribute leads, qualified leads as coming in from marketing, even though we have a fairly significant outbound effort as
Mm-hmm.
well. It's sometimes difficult to attribute,
Sure.
where they come from. But at the end of the day, I don't really care because no one gets paid on leads or even opportunities. But we try to track all of those things to mostly for improvement. Is it growing? What's working and what's not working? And then as we move down the funnel, we really focus in on the conversion rates. And it's you can only do so many things at the same time, but we try to identify where in the funnel we see the biggest drop off or the biggest opportunity to improve. We use the data to help inform that decision. We rely on our guts and what we see and observe in the field as well to kind of tell us, hey, what we really need to do is do a better job with that first initial demo, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's really put some effort into that. Let's train people on it. Let's go back and rebuild the flow and the talk track. Let's get some outside eyes to look at it. And then we track it month after month, quarter after quarter to see if that ratio is improving. And, depending on your business, it's difficult. I think we're a company that does a relatively smaller number of relatively larger deals.
Mm-hmm.
It's that statistically it jumps around
Right.
from quarter to quarter, month to month, team to team.
Right.
But if you look at it over a long enough time period, you can definitely see trends. I think companies that have very high volume, high transaction rates, can more quickly see the fruit of the labor there. But we really try to focus on each step in each part of the conversion, be very aware of it, and try to understand what it is we can do to improve it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I agree with you. That's filling the top of the funnel is you're always going to want more if it's good. If they're good things to work on. But it can be a point of diminishing returns or even negative returns where I'm putting
absolutely.
garbage in there that it's choking out and we're not spending enough energy on the good ones.
Exactly. Well, and that's precisely what's happening. And it sort of gets to this idea of, which I think is part of the issue we're having with the tools in sales, is that people haven't really sort of crossed this bridge to really sort of think about, well, just because I can do something doesn't mean I should.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I can use these tools to generate a massive amount of top of the funnel activity, it doesn't mean I should. Yeah. Right? I could be more focused. So, let's go back to sales enablement. That's sort of one of my soapbox issues I get into about win rates. But I mean, ultimately it comes back to win rates, I think, even in sales enablement, because it's funny. It's one of the things that, and this could be a separate conversation we have at another time, but as I see too little focus on winning in sales these days. It's so much about the process, but it's not so much about winning. And I'm writing more about this, talking more about this with groups and so on. And you can just see it in the way people respond to it. It's almost like an alien concept to them. But that is the ultimate point of why you're here, right? We can't serve our customers if we don't win their business. Right.
I think it's a very again, very good observation. I think that my experience is a lot of companies are really focused. They're really good at the sales motions, and they're really good at winning the human relations and building the story and closing the deals. And then there's other organizations where it's all about the data. And what does the data say? And I think we've, as a society, in a lot of ways, have gone very heavily in everything's about the data direction.
Sure,
there's clearly tons of power and value there.
Sound bites,
but maybe we've gone a little too far. And maybe we need to make sure that we're coming back a little bit, because as I say, people buy from people. And I think that, especially where we are and our customers are business to business sellers, I think that's absolutely true. They're looking for a relationship. They're looking for
Sure.
A throat to choke if they need to.
Well, and I think there's the flip side of what you said. Yeah. I mean, people buy from people, but also we sell to people, not personas. And the data works both ways. We get too focused on that data and we forget there's a person on the other side of that we're dealing with. And I look at win rates, again, without digressing too far, but I tell people, sellers and sales leaders I work with, I said, I can look at any deal in your pipeline that you lost, and I bet you I can trace the reason back to a failure in discovery and qualification.
Yeah.
And
quite often.
And it's like, what? I said, it's not about you. It's not about the product. It's about, like, focus back to that. And these middle of the funnel activities that, we're so obsessed with our linear stage-based processes that we tend to forget that, as you said, there's a human on the other end and some very critical interactions in those early stages that really make the difference ultimately.
Yes, absolutely true. I mean, the product matters, the value and ROI matters. All of those things matter, but you can have the best product and the best value story and a competitor who does a better job of building trust and building a relationship and winning the confidence of the buyer is going to win.
Yeah,
a lot of times, and so it's one of the things I find challenging about my role as CEO is I feel like I'm constantly bouncing around from role to role to try to dive in a little bit deeper, because the truth is you have to get better on all those dimensions. You can't just say, hey, let's just go make a better and better and better product and no one's going to buy it.
Right.
Or let's just invest in customer success and, really smother people with love. And there's only so much Band-Aids are going to help. And, or just sell a bunch of stuff that ultimately no one uses because it doesn't work. That doesn't work either. Right. But it's like all of those, every dimension of the business has to continuously be improving and getting better. And I think it's the same thing through the funnel, through the sales cycle.
So let's talk about sales enablement again. Is sort of led off this idea is one of the early talk points was reading articles about people saying they have to make the business case to their CEOs for sales enablement. And, on one hand, I want to say, well, that should be self-evident, right? Is of course you want to enable your sellers. So, what's happening there? Why is this? Why am I reading that this is a difficult thing in many cases for people to make the case for this?
I think part of it just comes down to the term and the fact that it's a new term and people are like, wait, I don't know what that is. And there's definitely a segment of the population, probably myself included, that, the next new buzzword that comes along, insert eye roll, groan, yeah, sure, whatever. Suddenly it's, it goes from there's no one that's in sales enablement to there's 1,000 vendors in sales enablement because sales enablement's hot. They're still doing what they did yesterday. They just changed the name.
Right.
So I think there's a little bit of that, but for us, the business case, generally speaking, is pretty self-evident. You go to the CEO and you say, hey, our sellers spend way too much time looking for content. They don't like what they find a lot of times. They need it in sales cycles. Everyone sort of understands that. There usually isn't any pushback there. When in the early days, when we would go out, we just talk to people and say, hey, we help solve the PowerPoint problem. Like, okay, come in. That's literally all you would need to say, because they all have it. They all know that they're drowning in too much content and the sellers can't find what they need. And so you can pretty easily build a business case that says, well, they're going to spend less time searching and they're going to have better outcomes because they're going to be telling a more relevant conversation. All this money you're spending on marketing to get your messaging right and be able to tell those stories is wasted if you can't get it into the right hands of the sellers at the right time. And doing it the old way, brute force, pick up the phone, call marketing and say, could you build this for me? It just doesn't scale.
No.
We have customers who will definitely remain nameless, but they told us they spend several $100 million every year building content for sales. And before we got there, only 15% of it could they have a record of showing that it was ever used even once.
That's what I was going to say. I'd read the number 17% at some point, but yes.
And that was their own internal numbers, right? They were kind of, this was after we won the deal with them. They were, a little sheepish about sharing some of this. But it's not difficult to make a business case to say, hey, we're going to help you make sure that several $100 million that you're spending on content is being spent on the right stuff, and prove that it's being used and that it's helping win deals, and close the feedback loop around that. And you know what? You're probably going to find that there's 30 or 40 or 50 million in there that maybe you don't need to spend, or you could redirect to, some other areas that are more effective and being proven to be more effective. If you think about the tools that marketers have at their disposal today at the top of the funnel, it's unprecedented, the data. If you breathe on someone's website, that gets reported to the CMO in near real time. But once that opportunity gets handed off to sales, that data, that visibility into what's happening is much, much less. People go into CRM, but they're really reporting, most of the time they're reporting status. Here's what it looks like right now. And the history and what happened, a lot of that is takes the form of the emails, the conversations, the content that's shared back and forth. And there's very little visibility there. And if you're a marketer and you're being asked to reach down into the funnel and help sellers close deal, you feel like, wow, I throw it across the wall and then I'm blind. I can't see anything. I don't know what's happening. I think I know what should happen, and I create a bunch of stuff to help. And then the only feedback I get is screaming when it doesn't work. I never hear it was awesome. I only hear screaming when it doesn't work. And I don't have data.
Right.
So that's really what's driving, I think, the development of tools like ours, and why they're getting more popular. And generally, when you talk about it that way, you notice through that whole process, I never said enablement. The CEOs and the executives, they get it. They definitely understand that.
Right.
If you go in and say, I need a budget for sales enablement, they're probably like, I don't know what that means. Or don't we already spend on training?
So I was reading a white paper on this, 6 months or so ago about sales enablement, and from a big research company, and they're talking about, 3 legs to the stool: coaching, content, training.
Yep.
Is that sort of just making the picture more fuzzy as opposed to focusing more on content that's used and you can track it to real outcomes, as coaching and training, you really can't?
Yeah, I think it is all interrelated. I mean, it makes sense, and you could bundle it in a different way. A lot of times we're selling in more progressive industries. We sell to sales enablement professionals. In other industries that haven't really gotten around to having that as a dedicated role, we might sell to the marketing team because we're really focused on managing the content, or we might sell to the sales operations team who's involved in kind of trying to make sure the right processes are being followed. So, I think at a lot of companies, they took the training capability, they combined it with the coaching, which is a new idea. At least the technology there is kind of a new idea, that like coaching technology. And then they took the content management, which again is fairly new. The idea that content can find you instead of you having to go find it. So they're taking those things, they're putting them together and saying, okay, your role is to make the sellers more effective, more quickly, and have them spend less time doing non-value added tasks.
Right.
And I think if you find the CEO that is familiar with the conversation and then the concept and the terminology, then the business case is pretty. You probably don't have that conversation. I think it's the CEO who may understand the inherent needs of those things, but hasn't heard the term, or hasn't heard it bundled that way, and that probably is raising their hand and going,
okay. So for your sales team, what are you doing to enable your sales team?
Oh, we have lots of technology. As I said, I encourage our team, because it's the space that we're in. I encourage our team to push our technology as hard as we possibly can, but also push the sort of the adjacent technologies as hard as they can. And so we probably, we definitely overspend a little bit in the area of sales technology, because I think it's our job to make sure that we're, observing what's working, which vendors are doing better than others, how those things may integrate with our product to provide a better experience for sellers. So we have, pretty much every category we have a tool. In some of the categories we have 2 tools. Our team for using our own product is very sophisticated and very aggressive about making changes and trying stuff, and if it works and if it doesn't work. And they work with our own customer success team to give them feedback. They work with our own product team to give them feedback, or our own internal beta users. And they're great about it. They'll come back and tell us right away, this is terrible, bad idea. Don't roll this out to customers, or this is awesome. Go faster, do more. So we push that envelope pretty hard. It's, I think, a unique opportunity that we have.
Well, so for sales leaders, who are listening to the show, is so a question really about how they build out their own sales enablement capabilities. Because I went to the Sales Enablement Society meeting in Denver last September. I don't know if you were there, and sitting in several sessions, it was like, wow, a lot of these people carrying the title of sales enablement, A, haven't sold, B, were pretty junior. Seems like it's hard to build a movement based on the back of that. So, what do you tell sales leaders in terms of what they should be looking at in terms of growing their capabilities in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, varies a lot on the organization. Again, the smaller organizations, the needs there can be quite simple. But the larger organizations, I think they've all kind of come around to where they get it. They understand that they need to do better here, and they've solved the CRM problem. So now they're tracking things, and they have the data available that can enable these kinds of capabilities. I mean, if you think about it, if you didn't have a CRM, if you didn't have a place to store all this data to be able to tell you about that prospective buyer, then you couldn't there would be no way to use that data to suggest here's the right content, or to customize that content, right? So it's a big enabler, but most companies now have gotten on the other side of that. So I think they all kind of see this as the next evolutionary step, and they're being pushed hard by their executives to do more, to do more with less. So I need to increase the quotas on the people that I've got. I need to increase the attainment rates that we get. We need to shorten sales cycles, and so they're pushing hard on that.
All the holy grail. Though we're seeing quota attainment rates go down and so on. I mean, one question, because I think this ties to what the whole enablement issue is that, and it sort of gets to quota setting, because somebody had asked me about this a couple weeks ago at an event, was, I said, okay, have you ever talked to an executive that said, look, we're going to raise quotas 10% this year, but then has done an assessment and said, well, we haven't increased the skills or capabilities of our sellers by 10%. So, are we just perpetuating the cycle of, greater increasing number of sellers not hitting quota because we're scaling quotas beyond their capabilities and we're not investing sufficiently in developing the sellers' capabilities?
Yeah. I get asked as an entrepreneur, I get asked a lot of questions a lot of times about, well, did you ever imagine that the business would be, this big and after these many years? And, I said, well, it's really easy to create a spreadsheet model of your business and go, okay, we're going to grow this many percentage points this year and next year and the year after. And here's how many people we're going to have. And here's how many customers and how much revenue. And so you see it and you say, oh yeah, you've got, 700 employees and $100 million of revenue. And it took this many years. And it's another thing altogether to actually experience it, where you're sitting in a room or standing on stage and looking out and seeing 700 faces shining back at you, or all the customers at your customer event. And I think the same thing kind of applies here. If you manage your business, you manage your quotas, it's really easy to get to any answer that you want. Let's just increase the quota by 10%. Well, that's a pretty arbitrary number. Why not 12? You do 12, it's going to look even better. So let's until the end of the year comes and you didn't hit your quota. So, I think it's kind of the same conversation that we had earlier. Like, use the data. The data can tell you things, but the data is not going to solve your problems all by itself. You have to take that data, understand what it means, be, I think, aware of the blind spots of what maybe it doesn't mean, and then, and get better at your jobs. You have to have the sellers be able to tell a better story and have a product that's better, and work on the right things and not the wrong things, and all of that stuff has to also improve. And I think, enablement is right in the middle of that, and in trying to provide, on a couple of different dimensions, ways in which the sellers can do better, and where managers and leaders can scale up, those performance improvements.
Perfect. All right, Doug, we've run out of time, but really appreciate you spending the time with us. It's been a great conversation. Tell folks how they can connect with you or find out more about what Seismic's doing.
All right. Well, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with new folks. And then you can come by our website, seismic.com, and learn a ton about the product there, and be happy to give people demos and all that as well. So
Perfect.
Really appreciate the chance, and hopefully I'll run into you on the road out there on your bike in a couple days.
Well, that's good. Are you a rider?
I am.
All right.
Not as much as I used to be, but
well, who is?
Too much work, not enough fun. But
yeah, well,
I do recognize the water bottle in your background.
Well, that's actually my Peloton bike right there that you're seeing.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Crammed into my small New York apartment. So anyway, Doug, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again shortly.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, friends, that was Accelerate for this week. First of all, as always, I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank my guest, Doug Winter. Join me again next week as my guest will be Jens Henschel. Jens is the London-based founder and managing director of the Fivis Partnership. Now, if you're in sales, if you sell to the enterprise, you're definitely going to want to catch next week's episode. Jens, because it's a very different topic. Jens is a senior procurement professional. As part of what his company's work is they work with enterprises around the world to help them improve the efficiency of their procurement efforts. He also consults with sales teams to help them understand how procurement works, how procurement teams are measured, and about how a seller to effectively work procurement to have them help you close more deals. I mean, it's a very different take on things. It's a really interesting conversation, so be sure to join us next week. Before you go, don't forget to check out The Sales House. That is the sales performance accelerator for B2B sellers just like you. Visit thesaleshouse.com/join. We look forward to seeing you there. And also, thank you again for joining me this week. Until next week, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.